system down there.
If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Karen Hoopert on the right to free representation. Sunday at 9 on Afterwards, part of Book TV This Weekend on C-SPAN 2.
Next on C-SPAN, we go live to the House floor. Votes on a couple of bills they debated earlier.
Chief Financial Officers of the Office of the Chief Financial Officer of the District of Columbia may perform the functions and duties of the office in an acting capacity if there is a vacancy in the office.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, proceedings will resume on questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order: H.R. 1067 by the yeas and nays, H.R. 1068 by the yeas and nays, and approval by the Journal de novo. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. The unfinished business is a vote on the motion of the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1067 on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1067, a bill to make revisions in Title 36 United States Code as necessary to keep the title current and make technical corrections and improvements.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House back for votes on a couple of measures debated earlier. Very light day legislatively for the House today. Two measures that would make changes in U.S. Code. A 15-minute vote here, and two 5-minute votes will follow if they indeed use that last vote for a vote on the Journal as the final vote. So a 15-minute vote. This is the one and only series of votes in the House this evening. Over in the Senate, and meanwhile, they've been debating the Internet sales tax bill. Also, the Majority Leader Harry Reid has been on the Senate discussing possible cancellation of the sequestration cuts, some ideas he's been tossing around on the Senate floor and debating. Earlier today, Jerry Moran, the senator, the Republican from Kansas, and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut called on the Federal Aviation Administration to postpone for 2 months the closure of air traffic control towers and the furlough of employees due to those sequestration cuts. The senators today introduced legislation, actually earlier this month, that would prohibit the FAA from closing 149 FAA contract control towers due to furloughing of its air traffic controllers. They held a briefing earlier today. It's about 20 minutes. We'll show you what we can during this 15-minute vote.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining Senator Blumenthal and I on a topic that we have been engaged in now, it seems like, for a very long time. As you may recall, we made an effort in the continuing resolution to make certain that the issue of air traffic control towers was addressed. The administration had announced the closing of more than 140 towers. I believe that that's contrary to public safety, and I certainly believe it's unnecessary for the administration to take the position that they are taking. And in fact, the amendment that I offered, that we offered, was designed to give them clearly the flexibility to avoid the closing of air traffic control towers. You may recall that I made the plea of Secretary Ray LaHood to indicate his support for the amendment. He told me that while he'd like to be helpful, that the administration opposed that amendment. Senator Blumenthal and I had, to my knowledge, no senator who opposed this amendment. It was a very bipartisan effort, but because of the administration's opposition, I assume it was never allowed to come to a Senate vote. So we again I believe that the administration has the ability to avoid closing air traffic control towers, and I believe they should use that flexibility and that discretion. But in the absence of that, Senator Blumenthal and I have introduced legislation to prohibit the closing of those air traffic control towers. And that the sponsorship and support for that legislation continues to grow. We introduced it just a few days ago. Already we have 33 co-sponsors, 18 Democrat members of the Senate, 15 Republican members of the Senate in support of the prohibition against the closing of those air traffic control towers. I think what we're looking for is just some common sense some recognition that we have the ability to prioritize. I'm a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee and a member of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee. Administrator Huerta was in our was in our committee last Thursday, in which I found no satisfaction in his responses, and again indicated to him that the FAA could make different decisions than they are currently making. He indicated to me, in fact, my question to him was, why is it a higher priority to reduce the funding for air traffic control towers as compared to the funding of unobligated balances in capital and research accounts? And he indicated that he did not have the authority to use those dollars. My point to him was that's exactly what our amendment provided, was the authority to use those dollars to use them to keep the air traffic control towers open. The FAA has concluded that there's a 2-month hiatus in the closing of the towers due to lawsuits filed by a number of airports across the country. In the interim, that ought to give Senator Blumenthal and I the opportunity to pursue a legislative remedy unless the administration, in my view, comes to their senses and solves this problem without legislation. We are inquiring of Chairman Rockefeller. Conversations have occurred with his staff. We hope that the Commerce Committee would consider this legislation. I will continue to encourage both Chairman Rockefeller and Ranking Member Thune to do exactly that. We've now seen the latest manifestation of this issue in the furloughing of air traffic controllers. And again, I could have no better ally, no firmer colleague in this effort than Senator Blumenthal, and I very much appreciate his help and support. He led the effort in the budget on this issue and had greater success than I did in the continuing resolution. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Well, let me first of all thank Senator Moran for his leadership. He's really been at the forefront of this effort, and I've been very proud to be a member of this team, which now includes senators from the states that are affected, and many more will be affected. More than 40 states around the country have these contract towers, which are vital not only to air safety, but also to economic development and jobs. What's at stake here is the risks to air traffic that are minimized or reduced by these air traffic control towers, but also economic development in areas like New Haven, for example, where Tweed Airport would be substantially impacted. It isn't just the LifeStar flights that come into Yale New Haven Airport or the organ transplants that fly in by private plane, but also the economic development in the Tweed New Haven area with bioscience and medical research that is aided by the airport there that would be very substantially impacted by the closing of that air traffic control tower. And so this move has widespread implications in the regions that are affected and across the country in air safety, but also economic development and job creation. And that's why it really is a matter of common sense, as Senator Moran said so well. It is a matter of basic common sense that saving the $50 million at stake here is not really saving at all. In fact, it's penny wise, pound foolish. It is long-term a cost to the nation. And I think that all we're doing is enabling the administration to do what we think it can do right now, but says it can't, and that is to move the money in the FAA accounts from one account to another. And I think that a vast majority of the United States Senate agrees with us, and obviously the vote on the budget shows it, and I'm looking forward to moving forward in the next 2 months, if necessary. My hope is that the administration will do administratively what we think it has the legal authority to do anyway.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the furloughs of the controllers themselves. What do you think of the administration's contention that it really doesn't have a lot of leeway other than to make that kind of move? And what, if anything, do you think Congress can and should do about those furloughs?
Well, I hope in the hearing process that we have asked Chairman Rockefeller and the Commerce Committee to have in regard to air traffic control towers, I have no doubt but what this issue of controllers will be front and center as well. And so I think that it certainly is an issue that the committee ought to examine, that Congress ought to address. Again, I think the administration does have the flexibility, and if they don't, and perhaps it's easier for me to say this than Senator Blumenthal, but we attempted to give the President the authority to have the flexibility of picking and choosing, that there was to be no necessarily across-the-board cuts. And as you may recall, the administration issued a SAP indicating that the President would veto legislation that gave that flexibility. So, one, I think that the administration does have the opportunity to make decisions about prioritizing spending within the FAA and within the Department of Transportation. But if they do not, they ought to be asking. I mean, the surprising thing to me is that this administration, this President, doesn't want or doesn't even ask for the ability to reestablish the priorities. My experience in serving in Congress with two previous administrations, and what I read from history, is every president wants more authority, not less. And the attempt to give the President the authority to make those prioritization decisions is something that they're not even asking for.
Let me just add, I believe the administration ought to postpone these furloughs at least for 30 days to give the Congress an opportunity to act as a member of the Commerce Committee. I think that our authority certainly would permit a more flexible and constructive response to the sequestration requirements at a time when there's heightened security or concern about security around the country in the wake of some of the recent developments in this country. The additional crowds, potential confusion at airports certainly ought to be avoided, and that's why at the very least there should be a postponement of those furloughs, not only to avoid cost and inconvenience, but to address the heightened concerns about security.
Sir, do you agree with some Republicans who are saying this is alarmist, this is the administration trying to raise a red flag over sequestration and getting rampart-ing kind of thing?
What I believe is there ought to be a postponement of these furloughs to give all of us a chance to revisit the constraints that are imposed by sequestration.
Yes, sir?
There's going to be a lot of pressure to come up with money to stop the furloughs. How is that going to affect your effort to transfer money to keep the control towers open?
I think there's broad support. I would see these issues together. Both involve the air traffic controllers and furloughs, as well as the closing of air traffic control towers, involve the safety of the flying public. They involve the inconvenience of those who travel by air. They affect the economy. They affect our national security. I see them both tied together, and I would guess that there would be a more universal solution to this problem in which both control towers and air traffic controllers would be considered in the same legislation. So I see them moving along together as a team in finding a solution. Senator Blumenthal is a member of the Commerce Committee. I, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I certainly have the sense that members of the Appropriations Committee, including Chairperson Barbara Mikulski, who came to visit with me after the CR, indicating a willingness to help find the necessary resources to make certain that the control towers were not closed. There just is broad consensus and widespread support for solving these problems. Again, I would put the onus on the administration to solve the problem, but in the absence of their willingness or desire to do that, then I think there's strong congressional support for a solution for both the control tower issue, which we got involved in a long time ago, and now the most recent manifestation of this circumstance with the furloughing of air traffic control tower controllers. Interesting to me, Administrator Huerta was in front of our committee, in front of the Commerce Committee last Tuesday, in front of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation last Thursday, and made, to my knowledge, no reference or statement in regard to what he was going to announce the following day. And I would encourage greater cooperation and communication between the FAA and Congress, particularly the committees of jurisdiction for the FAA in simply not. I don't know how you come up with a plan that you announce on Friday that you're furloughing on Sunday. Seems to me there would be a much longer kind of lead time to give airlines and airports greater ability to respond. And so the circumstance we find ourselves in is surprising to me and unnecessary. And I certainly would join with Senator Blumenthal to suggest a delay by the administration to give the administration a chance to change their mind, or give Congress the chance to respond.
Senator Moran, I mean, Senator Blumenthal didn't go directly at this, but do you think the administration sees a political benefit in having the public understand or feel some impacts from the sequester?
You know, it's always hard to attribute motives to people and the decisions they make. I explained to you that Secretary LaHood indicated to me that he would like to be helpful, but the administration opposed the amendment. And his explanation was that we are only interested in long-term solutions, not short-term solutions. A very unsatisfactory answer when you're dealing with the continuing resolution, which is nothing but short-term solutions. The entire continuing resolution was about how to fund the government from now until September the 30th. So no satisfactory explanation for why the administration opposed our amendment. And it certainly has led to the speculation by many Republicans and Democrats that there is an effort afoot to try to demonstrate that the sequestration is something that is so painful that it cannot be accomplished without causing dramatic consequences. I would remind folks, as I've said before, I didn't vote for sequestration in the first place. I think across the board cuts are inappropriate, irresponsible. We ought to be having the appropriations process to prioritize spending. We ought to have the hearings that determine what we can afford and what we can't afford. I'm not here to defend the process that we're going through as far as sequestration, but I am here to say that there is a better response by an administration than the one we've seen to the circumstance that we're in. No one has explained to me satisfactorily why they would oppose taking $50 million from unobligated balances to keep air traffic control towers up and running. And in the absence of that, it lends itself to the belief that there is something else afoot here trying to demonstrate in a political sense that sequestration is something that the country cannot afford. And again, hard to attribute motives, but I would say that that's the best explanation that I've heard. I have no other.
And I would just add, you know, I take the administration at its word that it needs this authority to avoid the sweeping ramifications of closing these air control towers. So we're going to give them that authority if, in fact, they need it. But the two are linked because closing the contract air traffic control towers puts an additional burden on the control towers that are staffed by FAA employees. The response of the administrator when I asked him about Tweed, for example, which has commercial flights, is that they could use surrounding control towers, whether in New York or at Bradley Airport in Hartford, and now those air traffic control towers are going to be further constrained in their staffing. So the two systems are really very closely linked, and that's why this step is important, to keep those air traffic control towers open at the contract airports, as well as a postponement in the furloughs, which will enable all of us to see what the legal authority is, where the cost and inconvenience and economic impact can be reduced, and make sure that we don't inhibit the economic recovery that is going slowly, all too slowly, and fragilely.
As I said in the debate on the continuing resolution, if the administration is trying to make the political point that sequestration is difficult to accomplish, very damaging to the public, to the American citizen, this is not a place to make that point. Let's have the debate about sequestration. Let's have the conversation about whether or not we can afford a reduction in the growth in spending. But let's not put those who travel in this country's safety at risk to prove that political point. So it is, to me, it certainly seems as if politics is playing a significant role in determining what actions the FAA are taking and Every indication that I have from conversations with my colleagues is it emanates from the White House. Last question? Yes, sir?
Well, I mean, so is it your sense that you think Congress will act on both the furloughs and the tower issue separate from a broader budget deal, just in isolation, deal with those two issues?
You know, my view is that sequestration is here through September 30th. We ought to try to address the specific challenges. Again, Richard may have a different view than I do on this, but we ought to try to address the specific challenges that presents in regard to air traffic control towers and air traffic control furloughs. Needs to be addressed now, ought not wait till after September 30th, but we need an appropriations process that is working. I cheer Barbara Mikulski on in her efforts to make sure that we get back to regular order. This is the place that these decisions should be made in prioritizing our spending. In the interim, we ought to solve the problems that we can solve, and we ought to particularly solve those problems that affect the safety of the American people.
And I would just add, you know, whatever the politics here, the effort of the United States Congress ought to be to reduce and minimize the harm resulting from sequestration. There's no point in doing more harm. Our motto or mantra should be, as the doctors say, first do no harm. And that's what is resulting from this approach to sequestration in an area that is not a frill or a luxury for many people. Travel is essential to the functioning of our economy. In this day and age, air travel is integral to business development and job creation, and all of us have a stake in making sure that we do nothing to harm that interest in addition to air safety.
I think Senator Blumenthal and I's call is that the congressional process ought to work. We ought to solve this problem, and we'll live to debate the consequences of sequestration and the appropriations process in the future. But in the interim, let's solve the problem with air traffic controllers and the furlough of control tower operators.
And this is a very bipartisan effort. We have bipartisan support, not only Senator Moran and myself, but also in the co-sponsors who have joined us in this effort. So we can all agree that we should move forward on this bill.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And by the way, on the issue of the sequester, CQ reporting this afternoon that Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid today told reporters the Senate will take up a bill that would cancel the sequester for the remainder of the fiscal year and pay for it with savings, a move likely to be rejected by the GOP, but would let Democrats blame Republicans for the sequester squeeze on services across the country. That's from CQ this afternoon. Back live on the House floor, the first of 3 votes, one of 2 votes dealing with changes to U.S. Code. This has been a 15-minute vote. 2 5-minute votes will follow, and then special order speeches after that.
On this vote, the yeas are 409, the nays are 0. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended and the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlett, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1068 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1068, a bill to enact Title 54 United States Code, National Park Service and related programs as positive law.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And it's a bill that deals with recodifying existing laws related to the National Park Service. 5-minute vote. One more 5-minute vote. The vote on the journal is scheduled next. Over in the Senate, meanwhile, they just gavelled out, it seems. They've been debating the online sales tax measure. When the Senate returns tomorrow, you can follow them on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. And for some details on that Internet sales tax bill, we spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter. Gautam Nagesh, technology reporter for CQ Roll Call, joins us from Capitol Hill. What's the purpose of this Senate Internet sales tax bill?
Well, this legislation would allow states to require that online retailers charge sales taxes, collect and remit them when consumers make a purchase online. That includes retailers not within their own state.
Who are some of the bill's supporters, and why did some of them say that it will level the playing field for retailers?
Well, the bill supporters, which include the retail industry, that's the big retailers, Walmart, Best Buy, Amazon.com, which is an online retailer also, they say that brick and mortar retailers currently are at a disadvantage because they have to charge the sales tax, whereas online retailers don't. Consumers technically are supposed to pay these taxes on their tax return, but studies show that most don't. So in effect, online goods get that 6 to 10% on average discount versus physical goods.
What about the opponents of the bill, particularly in the Senate? Who are we going to hear from? And what are their arguments against the bill?
Well, the strongest opposition is really coming from those states where they don't currently charge a sales tax, because they contend that their retailers would have to, it would be a burden on them to calculate the sales tax for these various localities and states and then add it, especially since the state they're set up in does not charge a sales tax. And those include Montana, Oregon, New Hampshire, and these senators have promised to use up all of the cloture debate time. They're also perhaps going to try some procedural attempts to derail the debate, maybe offering revenue amendments, that sort of thing. They're doing everything they can to set this bill back. They say that it wasn't brought through the regular order. It did bypass the Finance Committee. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid brought it directly to the floor. So that is one of their points of contention. But largely they oppose this bill, and they have opposed the collection of online sales taxes.
Let's go back to the big retailers, both the big box stores, the Best Buys, places like that, and the online retailers, Amazon, eBay. Are they all in lockstep in support of the bill?
I wouldn't say lockstep, but the retail industry as a whole, yes. They very much support this bill. They see this as a lifeline. People have heard of things like showrooming. Anyone can tell you that bookstores, for example, electronic goods stores have done very poorly over the last decade. We've seen some major national chains either consolidate or fold completely because consumers are not stupid. They realize that goods are cheaper online. Part of that is because of the sales tax. There are other reasons, but largely we have seen this trend of consumers sort of looking at goods in the store, maybe window shopping, and then going online and buying those goods. That is damaging to both the stores and to the states and localities that collect sales tax and rely on them to provide services. So there is merit to that argument.
What are some of the key amendments that are coming up that you're looking out for?
Well, we've seen a few budget amendments. We're not certain exactly what amendments are going to be allowed. So I think it's a little bit early to say. I do know that we're going to see the senators who oppose the bill attempt to either filibuster or put up some sort of hold. A revenue amendment could potentially derail debate. It's a bit complex exactly why, but it would potentially force the bill to be discharged. So there are various procedures that they can attempt. How Senator Reid structures the debate is going to be crucial.
Well, going on forward from here, what are the prospects in the Senate? Is there a companion bill in the House, and has the White House weighed in yet?
The prospects in the Senate do look good. We saw cloture received. There were only 20 votes against it, 70 plus in favor, so cloture passed quite easily. We saw a non-binding vote along similar lines on the Senate budget resolution passed, similarly with 3/4 of the chamber's support. So supporters expect this to get through the Senate. I think it's a pretty safe bet that it will do so, probably this week if the opposition doesn't successfully stymie it. The House is another matter. House leadership is very resistant to anything that's perceived as a tax increase. The Heritage Foundation has said that this is a tax increase and it oversteps federal bounds. They're a prominent conservative group. What they say matters. We've seen other anti-tax advocates also weigh in against the bill. So the House has concerns. However, the retail industry has a lot of clout. We see Amazon.com, when they switched from opposing this to supporting it last year, that made a huge dent in the opposition. And I think it's fair to say that this is something that will likely take place, if not this year, then next year. So the House negotiations are ongoing. The sponsor is Stephen Womack. He has said that he's negotiating with House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte to address his concerns. Nothing has come out of that yet, but we will see what happens.
Gautam Degesh, technology reporter for CQ Roll Call, with an update on the Internet sales tax bill. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And the Senate has gavelled out for the evening. Back tomorrow morning at 9:30 Eastern. Some nomination votes at around noon, and more debate on that online sales tax bill.
On this vote, the yeas are 409, the nays are 0. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended and the bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion, the Chair. Gentleman is recognized. Marcus Officer.
Ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And it's the last recorded vote in the House this evening. Special order speeches are next. On the agenda tomorrow, a measure that helps people with pre-existing conditions get health insurance. Also this week, a bill that would authorize the sale of all but 3 billion cubic feet of federally owned helium. The House back tomorrow, 10 o'clock Eastern for morning hour speeches, noon for legislative business. The Senate has finished their work for the day, gaveling out to return tomorrow at 9:30 Eastern. A couple of nomination votes, presidential nomination votes at noon tomorrow over in the Senate, and they continue debate with the online sales tax bill. You can follow the Senate when they return over on C-SPAN 2.
this vote, the ayes are 283, the nays are 118. Is there any member wishing to cast a vote?
Mr. Ellison. Mr. Ellison votes aye. Mr. Barton of Texas.
Have all members now voted? Any member wishing to change their vote?
Mr. Barton votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 285, the nays are 118, with one voting present. The journal stands approved. The gentleman from California seeks to be recognized.
I ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, be removed as a co-sponsor for H.R. 1588, the Medicare Drug Savings Act.
Action so ordered.
Okay, the chair will now entertain 1-minute request. Purpose as the gentlewoman from Florida. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the tireless efforts of the Women's Fund of Miami-Dade, a nonprofit organization based in the district I so proudly represent. Over the last 20 years, this inspiring organization has been committed to creating programs and initiatives through which all girls and women can prosper and become leaders in our community and indeed our nation. Additionally, the Women's Fund of Miami-Dade is devoted to fostering awareness about sexually exploited children through its grantee partner, the Christie House, an organization dedicated to helping children and families recover from abuse and to bring to justice those who violate them. Each year we set aside May 25 as a day when we reflect on sexually exploited and missing children and renew our efforts to make child protection a national priority. I thank the Women's Fund of Miami-Dade for its work to eradicate the sexual exploitation of children and to break the cycle of abuse through direct prevention and therapy and by spreading awareness of the damage inflicted upon innocent children. It is through the actions of compassionate members of our community, like the Women's Fund and Christie House, that will stop these injustices against the most vulnerable of our society, our children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the time.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does a gentleman from New Mexico seek recognition? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, at a time when our communities are dealing with the impact of climate change, cuts from the sequester will negatively impact our long-term efforts to combat this challenge. Energy conservation is a vital component of reducing carbon emissions. Weatherization programs and the Energy Star program have been instrumental in reducing energy consumption. In 2011, Energy Star helped Americans reduce emissions by the equivalent of 41 million vehicles, and during these tough times it cut utility bills by $23 billion. As a result of the sequester, further progress on these programs is at risk. Research and development in clean energy technologies are essential to reducing our dependence on oil and cutting emissions. Sequestration's funding reductions threaten to slow developments in solar and advanced battery technology. Sadly, my Republican colleagues have been reluctant to debate further action to address climate change. That is one more reason why we cannot afford to sit by and do nothing while sequestration reduces the effectiveness of the programs we already have in place that are part of the climate change solution.
Time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection. Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, despite blocked attempts to fully repeal the so-called Affordable Care Act, this law is doomed to collapse under the weight of its own flawed design. Just last week, Democratic Senator Max Baucus of Montana, a key architect of the Affordable Care Act, referred to the administration's signature health care law as a looming train wreck. Another promise that was used to force passage of the President's health law was broken in February when the administration's Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced that it would stop enrolling people with pre-existing conditions due to funding constraints. This week, the House will vote on the Helping Sick Americans Now Act, which would extend access to those with pre-existing conditions. The coverage would be funded by eliminating the Prevention and Public Health Fund, a program under Obamacare identified as rife with mismanagement and taxpayer abuse. While full repeal would have been less costly and painful, the gradual failure of the Affordable Care Act is inflicting significant pain on families, businesses, and our economy. Don't take my word. Just listen to the senator from Montana. His recent remarks aren't far off the mark, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
To ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just a matter of reflecting on last week and to speak about some very important Homeland Security issues. Publicly, I want to thank the outstanding law enforcement, FBI, and others who worked on the tragedy of 9/11 as we proceed as members of Congress to further investigate how not to have that happen again. But the one point that I want to make very clearly that has been said over and over by members and certainly by leaders of the administration, this does not and should not stop comprehensive immigration reform. We should proceed with regular order because you need to know who's in this country. Then I offer my deepest sympathy to those in West Texas, but make the point that we have to have a nexus between chemical plants and those who hold those kinds of hazardous materials, to have a mechanism of reporting to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to provide a security plan and process to avoid the horrific tragedy that occurred. I will soon be introducing such legislation, and I certainly believe that it is our role to intervene and to secure the homeland. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, Mr. Speaker, April is National Autism Awareness Month, and autism affects the lives of 2 million Americans, Mr. Speaker. It's the fastest growing developmental disability in terms of new cases. In my home state of Minnesota, 1 in every 67 children is diagnosed with autism. Minnesota is also home to some great institutions like the Holland Center and the Minnesota Autism Center, which serve Minnesota families with educational and rehabilitation services for children with autism. Minnesota healthcare professionals are also on the front lines in the search to discover the cause of the high rate of autism among Minnesota's Somali population. While there's currently no medical detection or cure for autism, this disorder is treatable. Studies show that the early diagnosis and intervention can lead to significantly improved outcomes. Mr. Speaker, I was a co-sponsor of the Combating Autism Reauthorization Act last Congress, and we must continue the fight and effort to ensure that those with autism get the attention and the care that they need. And I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to honor the memory of the innocent men, women, and children who perished in 1915 during the Armenian Genocide. Each year, the United States Congress has the opportunity to stand on the side of justice and recognize the Armenian Genocide. Such action would fortify America's moral standing in the family of nations and send a strong message to our NATO ally, Turkey, that it must examine the dark chapters of its past and the discriminatory impulses of its present. Turkey has repeatedly thwarted efforts by Congress and successive administrations to recognize the Armenian Genocide by threatening all manner of retaliation should recognition be accorded. I submit that we do no favors to Turkey by acquiescing in its cynical campaign. As we approach the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide in 2015, it is time for the United States to formally recognize this tragic chapter in world history and to bring some measure of peace and healing to those of Armenian descent. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
This Thursday, the City of Fremont will be one of 3 cities nationwide to be recognized with the City Award for the Make a Difference Day competition. The Make a Difference Day competition is a national day of volunteering held each year on the 3rd Saturday of October. Fremont has participated in this competition for the past 10 years. Last year alone, 1,300 residents in Fremont participated in 76 projects across the city to clean up, improve, and make our community much, much better. On Thursday, Fremont residents Suzanne Shenfield, Deborah Watanuki, and Christine Beach will be presented with the award on behalf of the City of Fremont. Fremont will also be awarded $10,000 to benefit the Fremont Family Resource Center, which offers many services such as child care information, adult information and employment services, and educational programs. I am proud of Fremont and all of the participants in Make a Difference Day for their inspirational work to improve our neighborhoods. Together, each individual contribution builds a stronger and more sustainable community for everyone's future. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in favor of protecting our infrastructure, keeping our roads safe, and reducing emissions. There are serious safety, infrastructure, and environmental concerns involved with allowing even bigger and heavier tractor-trailers on our roadways than are currently allowed. Trucking accidents cause too many deaths, and the 3,373 victims in 2011 alone were disproportionately people who were driving in cars caught in these heavy truck crashes. These oversized trucks also inflict disproportionate damage on our roads, especially on our national bridge system. They impose a significant cost on the rest of us to pay for these repairs. Plus, allowing larger and heavier trucks would divert freight away from our rails and onto our highways, increasing congestion and emissions at a time when we are working hard to reduce both. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the extraordinary students, parents, and faculty of Cathedral High School in El Paso, Texas. Yesterday, I had the privilege of meeting with many of Cathedral's best and brightest, along with their principal, Brother Nick Gonzalez, and Chief Justice Richard Barajas, who leads the Center for Advanced Studies. What Cathedral students have achieved under their watch is truly incredible. This year, a record 6 graduating seniors have been designated as Gates Millennium Scholars, and 5 others were finalists for this prestigious award that provides scholarships to outstanding minority students. 2 others will be attending service academies. Overall, 98% of the graduating class of 115 has been accepted to college, and 32 seniors will be graduating with a degree from the El Paso Community College in addition to their Cathedral diploma. Cathedral is representative of our vibrant binational community in El Paso. Over 85% of the student body is of Hispanic origin, with students coming from El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, and southern New Mexico. The school's rigorous curriculum emphasizes social justice and community service, so graduates are not just model students, they are also preparing to become model citizens. I am proud to represent Cathedral High School and expect great things from all the students that I had the privilege of meeting yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you. The Chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. George Miller of California for today and for the balance of the week.
Without objection, the request is granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.